My name is Sarah. I am 27 years old. I live in the same small town where I was born. But this story does not begin here. It begins many years ago, when I was 16. Back then, my world was small, just my school, my home, and the quiet streets between them. But in that small world, there was him. Adam. He was my first love. The kind of love that made my heart beat faster when I saw him in the school corridor. The kind of love that made me write his name in the corner of my notebooks. We used to walk home together after class. The road was lined with old trees, and in autumn, the ground was covered with yellow leaves. We would talk about everything, the books we read, the dreams we had, even the silly things we wanted to do when we grew up. I remember one afternoon clearly. We sat on the old stone bench near the park. The sky was soft with evening light. He held my hand for the first time. It was warm. And in that moment, I felt like I had found something I would never lose. We made promises. That we would never stop talking. That even if life took us in different directions, we would find our way back to each other. I believed every word. But life has its own plans. It was the last week of school. The air felt different. Like something was about to change. But I didn't want to think about it. Adam had been quieter than usual. He still walked home with me. But sometimes our conversation stopped halfway. He would look ahead. As if he was already somewhere far away. One afternoon. We were sitting on that same stone bench in the park. The trees were full of green leaves now. And the sound of children playing echoed from the swings. He didn't hold my hand this time. Instead, he looked down at the ground. "I have to tell you something," he said softly. My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" I asked. "I'm leaving next month," he said. "My parents, they want me to study in the city. It's a good school. They think it's best for me." The words felt heavy in the air. I tried to smile. "That's good, Adam. You should go. It's your future." But inside, my chest felt tight. He looked at me then. And I could see the sadness in his eyes. "I don't want to go, not without you." I wanted to tell him to stay. I wanted to say I couldn't imagine my days without him. But I didn't. I just nodded slowly. We promised to write letters. We promised nothing would change. That evening, I walked home alone for the first time in a long time. The road felt longer. The trees looked different. And even though he hadn't gone yet, I already missed him. It has been 11 years since that day. Adam left, and the letters stopped after a while. First, they came every 2 weeks. Then once a month. Then nothing. At first, I told myself he was just busy. Maybe his studies took all his time. Maybe he lost my address. But deep down, I knew the truth. Life had taken him somewhere I could not follow. Now, I am 27. I live alone in a small apartment above the bookstore where I work. The bookstore is old, with wooden shelves that smell of paper and dust. I spend my days arranging books, writing down orders, and talking to the few customers who stop by. The mornings are quiet here. I open the shop at 9. Sometimes, the bell on the door doesn't ring for hours. It is just me. And the sound of the rain outside. Or the warm light of the sun through the window. In the evenings, I walk home along the same streets I knew as a child. The park bench where Adam once held my hand is still there. Sometimes, I stop for a moment, run my fingers along the cold stone, and then keep walking. My friends say I should move to a bigger city. Try something new. Find someone new. But I stayed here. Maybe because part of me was still waiting. Waiting for something I didn't even believe could happen anymore. It was a Thursday afternoon. The bookstore was quiet. I was sitting behind the counter, reading the last page of an old novel. The bell on the door rang softly. It was Anna, an old school friend I hadn't seen in months. She looked the same, just a little older. Her hair tied up in a loose bun. We hugged quickly. Then she started browsing the shelves. We talked about small things. The weather. Her children. How the town hadn't changed much. Then, as she picked up a book, she looked at me with a smile. "You heard, right?" she said. "Heard what?" I asked. "Adam's back. Came in last week. He's living here again, for now." The words froze in the air between us. I tried to act calm, but my fingers tightened around the pen I was holding. I hadn't heard his name spoken out loud in years. It felt strange. Like a door in my heart had opened without warning. Anna didn't notice my silence. She just kept talking. About how he looked different. How he drove a nice car now. How people said he had a big job in the city. When she left, the bookstore felt different. Quieter. Heavier. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the rain outside, wondering what I would do if I saw him again. 2 days later, I closed the bookstore early. The air was cool, and the streets were still wet from the morning rain. I walked slowly, carrying a paper bag with bread and tea leaves. The town felt quiet. Just the sound of my footsteps. And the distant hum of a car. As I turned the corner near the park, I saw someone standing by the old stone bench. Tall. Dark coat. Hands in pockets. At first, I didn't recognize him. But when he lifted his head, my breath caught in my throat. It was Adam. Older now. His hair was shorter, with a few strands of gray near his temples. His face was sharper. His jawline stronger. But his eyes were the same. Only they looked heavier. As if they had seen too much. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the street. The sound of passing cars filled the silence. Then, he gave a small nod. Not a smile, just a nod. I nodded back. My heart beating too fast. We didn't cross the street. We didn't speak. We just stood there for a few seconds. And then I walked away. feeling like my past had just stepped into my present. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The image of Adam standing by the bench would not leave my mind. He was here. In the same town. So close, and yet. It felt like there were miles between us. Part of me wanted to run into his arms. To tell him everything. How much I had missed him. How I had waited. How I had kept every memory alive. But another part of me was afraid. What if he wasn't the same person I had loved? What if the years had changed him so much that I wouldn't even recognize the boy I once knew? I sat up and looked out the window. The street was quiet. The park bench was somewhere out there, hidden in the dark. I thought about going to find him. I even put on my coat. But my hands felt cold. My legs felt heavy. In the end, I stayed where I was. Just standing by the window, watching the streetlights, and wondering, was it better to keep him in my memories, perfect and untouched, or to see who he had become now? 3 days passed before I saw him again. It was late afternoon, and the sun was already low, painting the town in soft gold. I was leaving the bakery, a small paper bag of warm bread in my hands, when I heard a voice behind me. "Sarah?" I froze. I knew that voice. Even after all these years, my heart recognized it before my mind did. I turned slowly. Adam was standing there, a few steps away. No coat this time. Just a dark sweater and jeans. He looked ordinary, but my chest still tightened, the way it used to in school. "Hi," I said quietly. For a moment, we just looked at each other. His eyes searched mine, like he was looking for the girl he once knew. "It's been a long time," he said. "Yes," I replied. 11 years. He smiled faintly. "You remembered." "I never forgot," I said without thinking. The words hung between us, and I quickly looked down, pretending to fix my grip on the bread bag. He asked about my work. I told him about the bookstore. I asked about the city. He kept his answers short, polite, almost careful. After a few minutes, he checked his watch. "I should go," he said softly. "Maybe. I'll see you around." I nodded. Maybe. As he walked away, I realized my hands were shaking. It wasn't from the cold. The next morning, the bookstore was quiet as always. A thin layer of sunlight fell across the shelves, dust dancing in the beams. I was behind the counter, sorting through a box of newly arrived books, when the bell above the door rang. I looked up, and there he was. Adam. For a moment, my mind froze. He looked different in daylight. His hair was neatly combed, and he wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to show a watch on his wrist. "Morning," he said, his voice low but clear. "Hi," I replied, trying to sound casual, while my heart decided to race again. He walked along the shelves slowly, trailing his fingers across the spines of the books. I noticed he stopped at the travel section, pulling out a guidebook to Paris. "You still love books, I see," he said without turning around. "Always," I replied. "And you, still curious about the world?" He gave a small smile, flipping through the pages. "Some places I've seen. Some I still dream about." He eventually brought the book to the counter. I wrapped it in brown paper, our fingers brushing for the briefest moment. When I handed it to him, it was just a normal sale. Nothing more, nothing less. But when he left, the bell on the door seemed louder than usual, and the air in the shop felt warmer. I stood there for a while, the faint smell of his cologne still lingering, wondering why something so simple could feel so heavy. 2 days later, it happened again. I was closing the bookstore for lunch when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Do you have time for coffee?" I turned and saw Adam standing there, hands in his pockets, a half smile on his face. It wasn't the confident smile I remembered from our school days. It felt careful. Still, I found myself nodding. "Sure." We walked to the small cafe near the park, the same one we used to pass every day after school, but never entered back then because we couldn't afford it. Inside, the smell of coffee and fresh bread wrapped around us. We sat by the window. The sun was bright outside, but inside, the light was soft and golden. The conversation started with safe topics: work, weather, old school friends. But every time our eyes met, there was a pause, a silence, like we were both afraid of stepping into the past. I noticed little things. How he stirred his coffee slowly. How he glanced at his phone once and then quickly put it away. How his laugh didn't come as easily as it used to. It wasn't bad. It wasn't cold. It was just different. When we finished, he offered to walk me back to the store. I said yes. But the whole time I was thinking, we were two people sitting at the same table, but also two strangers trying to remember who we once were. That night, I sat by my window with a cup of tea, watching the streetlights glow in the quiet darkness. The coffee meeting had stayed with me all day. Not because of what we talked about, but because of what we didn't. I kept replaying his face in my mind. The way he smiled politely. The way his eyes shifted away. When the conversation got too personal, it hit me then. Adam wasn't the same boy who once walked me home under the yellow leaves. That boy used to talk about dreams like they were promises. He used to laugh so loud it made people turn their heads. He used to hold my hand without thinking twice. Now, he spoke like every word had been weighed before it left his mouth. He smiled like he was protecting something inside. And his eyes, they seemed to be looking at a world I couldn't see. I realized that the Adam I had been carrying in my heart all these years wasn't the Adam sitting across from me in the cafe. And that thought hurt in a way I couldn't explain. I wrapped the blanket tighter around me, took another sip of tea, and told myself maybe people change. Maybe I had too. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I wanted to know this new version of him, or if I just wanted to keep the old one alive in my memories. The next afternoon, the bookstore was busier than usual. A few regular customers came in, chatting softly as they browsed the shelves. Among them was Mrs. Harris, a talkative woman in her late 50s who knew everyone's business in town. She picked up a romance novel from the display and came straight to the counter. "I saw your friend yesterday," she said with a sly smile. "My friend?" I asked. "That tall man. Adam, isn't it? Back from the city. Quite the topic these days." I forced a small smile, pretending I wasn't curious. "Oh. What are people saying?" Mrs. Harris leaned closer, lowering her voice as if she was about to share a secret. "They say he's been through something. Something bad. Lost his job. Lost, more than that, maybe. Some say it's about money. Others, about a woman." I felt a strange twist in my stomach. "What woman?" I asked before I could stop myself. She shrugged. "No one knows for sure. But whatever happened, it's changed him. You can see it in his eyes." Her words stayed with me long after she left. I tried to focus on stacking books, but my mind kept returning to Adam's careful smile, the way he avoided certain questions, the heaviness in his voice. I wondered how much of the boy I once loved was still hidden somewhere beneath the man he had become, and if I even had the right to look for him there. The rain started without warning. One moment, the sky was cloudy but calm, and the next, it was pouring, the streets turning dark and shiny under the downpour. I had just locked the bookstore for the day, pulling my coat tighter around me, when I heard someone calling my name. "Sarah." I turned and saw Adam, standing under the awning of the cafe across the street. His hair was damp, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and for the first time since he came back, he was smiling, not politely, but like he used to. "Come on, you'll get soaked," he shouted over the rain. I hesitated, then dashed across the street, my shoes splashing in the puddles. When I reached him, he took my arm and pulled me under the awning. We stood close, the rain drumming loudly around us. "You always hated the rain," he said, looking at me with a spark in his eyes. "And you always loved it," I replied, feeling a strange warmth in my chest. For a moment, it was like we were 16 again. Two kids hiding from the rain, laughing about nothing. But then his smile faded, and he looked away. The moment slipped, like water running off the edge of the awning. "I should get going," he murmured. I nodded. But as I walked home in the rain, I realized my heart had started beating, the way it used to a long time ago. The next morning was crisp and clear, the kind of day where the air feels almost too fresh to breathe. I was rearranging a stack of new novels near the front window when the bell above the bookstore door rang. Adam stepped inside. He wasn't wearing his usual dark colors. Today, he had on a light blue shirt, The sleeves rolled neatly at his elbows. "Morning," he said, his tone lighter than before. "Morning," I replied, trying not to sound too surprised. He wandered through the shop for a moment, picking up a book here and there, then came to stand in front of the counter. "I was wondering," he began, hesitating just long enough to make my heart slow. "I'm having a small dinner tomorrow night. Nothing big, just a few people. Would you like to come?" I blinked, unsure what to say. Dinner at his place? After all these years? "Who else will be there?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Just some old friends. And maybe a few people from work. It's nothing formal. I'd just like to catch up." There was something in his voice, a quiet sincerity that made it hard to refuse. "All right," I said finally. "I'll come." He smiled then. A real smile. And it was like the room warmed by a few degrees. "I'll send you the address," he said, before leaving with a small wave. As the door closed behind him, I realized my hands were resting on the counter, tight enough that my knuckles had gone pale. The next evening crept up faster than I expected. All day at the bookstore, my mind kept drifting. To his voice. To that smile. To the weight of what catching up might really mean. By the time I got home, the sun was already dipping low, painting my small apartment in orange light. I stood in front of my wardrobe for what felt like hours. Everything I pulled out seemed wrong. Too casual. Too formal. Too much. In the end, I chose a simple navy dress. The one that always made me feel quietly confident. I left my hair loose, though I ran my fingers through it a dozen times, second-guessing myself. As I put on my coat, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked older. Not in a bad way. Just older than the girl who once dreamed about Adam, walking her home every afternoon. My heart was restless. I kept asking myself why I was nervous. It was just dinner. Just old friends. And yet, it didn't feel that simple. When I finally stepped outside, the air was cool and still. The streets glistened faintly from the rain the night before. I held onto my small clutch tightly as I walked, the quiet sound of my heels echoing in the evening. With each step, I felt like I was walking not just toward his home, but toward something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Adam's house stood at the edge of town, taller and grander than I'd imagined. Warm light spilled from the windows, casting a golden glow onto the quiet street. I paused at the gate, taking a slow breath before walking up the stone path. The door opened before I could knock. "Sarah," Adam said with a smile that reached his eyes. "Come in." The warmth of the house hit me instantly. Soft music playing somewhere in the background. The smell of roasted herbs drifting from the kitchen. Laughter from the dining room. He took my coat, his fingers brushing mine just enough to make my heart skip. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. I thanked him, though my voice caught on the word. Inside, the living room was filled with a few familiar faces from school, and some strangers I assumed were his work friends. They greeted me warmly, but my eyes kept drifting back to Adam. He moved easily between conversations, pouring drinks, making sure everyone had enough to eat. But every now and then, I'd catch him looking at me. Quick glances that felt like they carried more than words. At the table, I sat across from him. The candlelight softened his features, and for a moment, I could almost forget the years that had passed. But there was something else too. A quiet sadness beneath his laughter, like a shadow in the corner of the room. Halfway through dinner, one of his friends made a joke about second chances. The room laughed. Adam didn't. Instead, his eyes met mine. And for a few seconds, the noise around us seemed to fade. I didn't know what that look meant, but I knew it wasn't nothing. By the time the last guest left, the house had grown quiet. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the hum of background music. All of it faded into a comfortable stillness. Adam closed the door, turning the lock with a soft click. For a moment, he just stood there, his hand resting on the doorknob, his shoulders lowering as if he'd been holding them up all night. "Let me help you clean up," I offered, stepping toward the dining table. "You don't have to," he said. But his voice didn't sound like he meant it. We moved around the room quietly, stacking plates, gathering empty glasses, folding napkins. Our hands brushed once when we both reached for the same glass. Neither of us pulled away immediately. In the kitchen, the dim light above the sink cast long shadows on the walls. Adam rinsed a dish slowly, then set it down, leaning against the counter. "You haven't changed," he said suddenly. I turned to look at him. "That's not true. We both have." He gave a small, almost sad smile. "Maybe. But there's still something about you. Something I remember." The words hung in the air, soft and heavy. I wanted to ask what he meant. I wanted to tell him I still thought about him, still carried pieces of him with me. But instead, I just said, "Thanks for inviting me." His eyes held mine for a moment longer, before he looked down. "You should get home. It's late." As I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was so much between us still unsaid, and that maybe he was just as afraid of saying it as I was. The next morning, the bookstore was quieter than usual. A soft drizzle tapped against the windows, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee from the cafe next door drifted into the air. I was behind the counter, sorting a new delivery of books, when the doorbell chimed. I looked up, and there he was. Adam. He wasn't in his usual neat shirt and polished shoes. Today, he wore a hoodie and jeans, his hair slightly messy, like he hadn't planned to go anywhere, but ended up here anyway. "You're open early," he said, walking in slowly. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, closing the box of books. What brings you here? He hesitated before answering. I was in the area. It didn't sound convincing. And I didn't push him. He wandered to the corner of the store, running his fingers along the spines of old classics. Then he stopped, picked out a worn copy of The Great Gatsby, and turned to me. Do you still believe in happy endings, Sarah? The question caught me off guard. It was the kind of thing people ask when they're not really talking about books at all. I met his gaze. I believe they exist. But maybe not for everyone. He gave a faint smile. Almost like my answer hurt and comforted him at the same time. For a few moments, we just stood there, the rain pattering softly outside. Then he set the book down and said quietly, maybe I should tell you why I came back. Before I could reply, a customer walked in. And just like that, the moment was gone. The drizzle had turned into a steady rain by the time the shop emptied. Adam was still there, standing near the window with his hands in his pockets, watching the raindrops race down the glass. I locked the front door and flipped the closed sign, my heart already beating faster. You said you wanted to tell me why you came back, I reminded him, my voice softer than I intended. He turned, leaning against the shelf. For a moment, he didn't speak, just studied me, as if deciding how much truth I could handle. I thought leaving this town was the answer, he began, his voice low, almost heavy. I wanted more. More money, more excitement, more life. And for a while, I had it. The job, the apartment, the dinners that cost more than rent here. He paused, his jaw tightening. But it doesn't take much for it all to fall apart. A bad investment. A friend who wasn't really a friend. And then, her. I didn't interrupt. I just stood there, my fingers resting lightly on the counter's edge. She was beautiful, smart, dangerous in ways I didn't see until it was too late. When the money went, so did she. And by the time I realized how much I'd lost, it wasn't just my bank account. It was trust. In people. In myself. His eyes flickered to mine for a second. Then away again. I came back because this was the last place that felt safe. Even if it hasn't been home for a long time. The room was so quiet. I could hear the clock ticking behind the counter. I wanted to tell him I was sorry. I wanted to tell him I understood. But before I could, he straightened, clearing his throat. Anyway, I should go, he said. Like the weight of what he'd just shared was too much to leave hanging. And just like that, he was at the door. The bell chiming softly as he disappeared into the rain. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain hadn't stopped. And its steady rhythm against my window pulled me deeper into memories I'd been avoiding for years. I saw us again. Me and Adam. Barely 17. Sitting under the old oak tree behind the school. It was late afternoon. And the sunlight filtered through the leaves. turning his hair gold. He had been telling me about his dreams. A little apartment in the city. A job that would take him places. A life so big and bright that we'd never feel small again. "You'll come with me, right?" he'd asked, grinning like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And I had laughed, pretending not to be shy. "Of course I will." I remembered the way he looked at me then. Like there was no one else in the world. Like we were unstoppable. But the memory didn't stay golden for long. It shifted, blurring into the night he left. The argument. The way he wouldn't look at me. The way he packed his things without slowing down. The promise that he'd call. A promise he never kept. The hurt from that night still lived somewhere inside me. Quiet but sharp. And now he was back. Changed. Carrying stories that made me wonder if the boy I loved was gone forever. I turned off the lamp, pulled the blanket over my head, and told myself I was too old to still feel like that 17-year-old girl, waiting for him under the oak tree. The next morning at the bookstore felt ordinary. The kind of quiet, slow day where time moved lazily. I was restocking a display near the entrance when the doorbell chimed. I turned, expecting a customer. Instead, I saw a small brown paper bag sitting on the counter. No one was there. The door was already swinging shut. Curious, I opened the bag. Inside was a takeaway cup from the cafe next door. My usual order. Extra cinnamon on top. And a folded note. In Adam's handwriting, it read, "Thought you might need this on a gray morning." I stared at the note for a long moment, my fingers brushing the curve of each letter. It wasn't much. Just coffee. But it was the way he remembered. The way he knew exactly what would warm me. On a day like this. I took a sip. It tasted like the afternoons we used to spend together after school. Sitting on the park bench with cheap takeout cups. And dreams too big for our pockets. I set the note in my drawer, telling myself it was nothing. Just a kind gesture. But my heart refused to believe it was just that. It was late afternoon when the clouds finally broke, leaving the streets damp and shining under the fading sun. I was locking up the bookstore when I heard footsteps behind me, leaving without saying goodbye. I turned and saw Adam, hands in his pockets, that faint, teasing smile playing on his lips. "I didn't know I was supposed to," I replied, trying to sound casual, though my chest had already tightened. "Come on," he said. "I'll walk you home." We fell into step easily, the rhythm of our footsteps echoing softly on the wet pavement. The air smelled faintly of rain and fresh earth. And for a while, neither of us spoke. It wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. Like an old song we both still remembered the words to. As we passed the small park, I noticed how the light caught in his hair. How his laugh, when it finally came, sounded exactly the same as it did years ago. "You still take the long way home," he said, glancing at me. "Some habits don't change," I replied. Some people don't either, he murmured. But there was something unreadable in his tone. When we reached my building, he didn't step inside. He just stood there, hands still in his pockets, looking at me like there was more he wanted to say. "Thanks for walking me," I said quietly. He gave a small nod, but his eyes lingered. Then, almost reluctantly, he turned away, leaving me on the steps with the strange, restless warmth of having been close to him again. The next evening, I was wiping down the counter at the bookstore. When the door swung open, Adam stepped inside, his expression more serious than usual. He wasn't wearing his easy smile, and for a second, I felt my heartbeat quicken. "Hey," I said, trying to read his face. "Everything okay?" He walked straight up to the counter, resting his hands on it as if grounding himself. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. The way he looked at me, eyes steady, almost vulnerable, made the rest of the shop fade away. It was just us. The faint ticking of the wall clock, and the smell of paper and coffee. "Back then, when I left," he began. But the words were cut short by the sharp jingle of the shop's doorbell. A woman walked in, smiling warmly at me before turning to Adam. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere." She was around our age, elegantly dressed, with an ease in her manner that suggested she knew him well. Adam's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "This is Claire," he said, his tone measured. "She's an old friend." Claire extended her hand to me, her smile friendly. But I could feel the air shift, something unspoken passing between them. Whatever Adam had been about to say was gone, and I didn't know if it would come back. Claire stayed longer than I expected. What was supposed to be a quick hello turned into half an hour of light conversation. About the weather, about the town, about things I only half listened to. Adam tried to keep it casual, but I noticed the small things. The way he avoided my eyes when she laughed. The way his hand brushed hers when she handed him a book. When she finally left, the bell above the door chimed softly. The sound felt too loud in the sudden quiet. I busied myself rearranging a stack of novels, pretending not to care. But my thoughts were racing. Who was she, really? Why did she look at him with such ease? Like she had been in his life all along? And why did Adam seem different when she was here? "Sorry about that," he said finally, leaning on the counter. "She just showed up." I forced a small smile. "No problem. Old friends drop by sometimes." But inside, my chest felt tight. It wasn't jealousy exactly. It was something heavier. A reminder that I didn't know the whole version of Adam's life anymore. As I closed up the shop that night, I glanced at the empty street outside and realized something that scared me. I wasn't sure if I wanted to know everything, or if I was afraid of what I might hear. The next morning, the rain had cleared, but the heaviness from last night still clung to me. I opened the bookstore early, hoping that a busy day would keep my mind off Adam and Claire. It didn't work. Around mid-morning, the bell above the door chimed. Adam walked in, his hair still damp from a quick shower. His expression determined. "We need to talk," he said, not bothering with a greeting. I stepped out from behind the counter. "About Claire?" He nodded once. "Yes. About Claire." We sat at the small reading table by the window. Outside, the sun made the wet streets glisten. But inside, the air was tense. "She's not what you think," Adam began. "She's not an ex. She's not my girlfriend. She's my late brother's wife." The words caught me off guard. I blinked. "I didn't know you had a brother." Adam's eyes darkened. "I don't. Not anymore. He passed away 3 years ago. I wasn't here for him when he needed me most. And I've been carrying that guilt ever since. Claire, she's been trying to keep what's left of his world together. Sometimes that means checking in on me. Sometimes. I think it's her way of forgiving me." I didn't speak right away. The anger, the suspicion I'd felt last night, started to dissolve into something softer, but no less complicated. "She means well," he added. "But I didn't want you to misunderstand." "Not again." Our eyes met across the table. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't just telling me about Claire. He was trying to prove that, this time, he didn't want to leave anything unsaid. That evening, I walked home slower than usual. Adam's words still circling in my head. The streets were glowing with the last light of day, and the smell of rain still lingered in the air. When I reached my building, I found him there, leaning against the railing, hands shoved deep into his pockets, as if he'd been waiting for hours. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," he said quietly. I unlocked the door, but didn't step inside. "Why are you here, Adam?" He took a step closer. Close enough for me to see the faint crease between his brows. "Because I don't want to leave things the way they are. I don't want you thinking you're just someone from my past. You're not." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "You hurt me," I said, my voice trembling. "When you left, it felt like I was nothing to you." "I know," he said, his eyes holding mine. "And I've regretted it every day since. I can't change the past, Sarah. But if you let me, I want to be part of your future." The silence between us stretched, full of all the years we'd lost. Part of me wanted to say yes, to let the warmth in his voice pull me back. Another part still feared the ache of losing him again. Finally, I stepped aside, opening the door just enough for him to see the faintest smile on my lips. "Come in," I said softly. "Let's see where this goes." He exhaled slowly, relief flooding his face as he stepped inside. And just like that, the door closed behind us, and the next chapter began.